Are you tired of putting yourself last? Of taking care of everybody else's needs and powering through to meet the next set of impossible standards? In our fast-paced society, we lose touch with our intrinsic worth, with the ability to value ourselves for who we are right now. Instead of living life exhausted, frustrated, and disconnected from your authentic self, maybe it's time to put yourself back in the life you've worked so hard to create. Join radio host and life choreographer Laura Cheadle and learn how to build your dreams and live your sparkle using the 5 steps of flaunt. Find your fetish, laugh out loud, accept unconditionally, navigate the negative, and trust in your truth.
Hello, welcome to Flaunt. Build your dreams and live your sparkle. I'm Laura Cheadle, and oh my goodness, today we're going to talk about a topic that is so important and that so many of us kind of fall prey to not doing. And that is loving ourselves. And by loving ourselves, I really mean honoring and loving ourselves, not just being like, oh yeah, I really like me, I'm awesome, and then going out and seeking approval and validation from other people. If you're like most people in the world, if you're like me, if you're like our guest today, we tend to get a lot of our external validation from things like our jobs or our relationships. And it's really difficult when we're constantly seeking validation outside of ourselves, because it means we're always having to work more. It means we're always seeking, we're always trying, and we're never just in that state of really being happy and peaceful and calm, because we know that we are worthy. So, before we launch into our interview, and before I tell you a bit more about our guest, I want to pause for a moment and I want to invite you into my Facebook community called the Flaunt Flock. Now, the reason I'm inviting you into that community is twofold. One, because it's a great group of people who connect in that real deep way. And it's also a great group of people to connect with who can help remind you of your worth, who can help you find that validation within you. So if you've ever had a day that's really bad and you start beating yourself up, it's a community that you can go to and you can, post about it and say, this is what's going on, this is what I'm struggling with. And there's a whole group of people there, me included, who can offer you some support and some love, and most importantly, some perspective. You know how it is when somebody really gives you that good piece of perspective and they're able to say, okay, this is something you should worry about. This is not something you should worry about. This is some of the things that I've tried. Here is what I see. And then you can kind of just breathe in, breathe out, and move on. So, jump on Facebook, request to join the Flaunt Flock, and become a part of our community. You will not regret it. Now, on with today's guest. Today's guest is Giovanna Capozza, and she is a self-mastery mentor and a women's empowerment speaker. She is also a transformational coach and a blogger, and she hosts the She Rises podcast, which is an amazing podcast. She works with people seeking clarity on their path to purposeful lives and careers, which, as you might imagine, often involves overcoming emotional blocks. Now, she's got more than 12 years of leadership and business coaching experience, and she's a sought-after seminar, workshop coordinator, and host all across North America. One of the things that I really love about her and her coaching is the way it focuses on the discovery of self-love as the critical component to each woman's right to live a life that is expansive, adventurous, and customizable. Because really, if we don't love ourselves, we're constantly seeking more, and we're never quite going to get there. Her motto is, when sleeping women wake, mountains move. I'm going to say that again. When sleeping women wake, mountains move. And this exemplifies her philosophy that individuals are limitless repositories of energy waiting to be directed. What's really cool about her is she started off as an alternative medicine doctor and a spiritual teacher. And she considers herself a modern-day medicine woman, blending science with practical magic. She uses a lot of the concepts found in Course of Miracles, as well as her own journey from constantly seeking validation outside of herself to, as she calls it, spending more than a year, dating God and dating herself. So with that, welcome to the show, Giovanna. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
You are so vast. Tell the listeners a little bit about you and all of the incredible things that you do.
Sure. Well, it's a long story, but to make it really brief, I had an alternative medicine practice for 8 years that I left back in 2012, and after sort of hitting the wall with my own personal burnout and some things that were happening in my life, and I went on a year sabbatical, moved away to Mexico, and then proceeded to travel around the world for 5 years. And in that time, I created a coaching practice. And so now I coach high-achieving, ambitious women around their success and their relationships. And I bring in all of my sort of holistic alternative viewpoints. I'm a spiritual teacher. And that's sort of how I roll. I'm writing a book right now called Lovesick, Confessions of a Love Junkie, where I talk about Lovesick, which is the movement I'm starting around self-love and women in relationships, and in particular love addiction, which I talk about. And I work with ambitious sort of go-getting women who are finding that they're either on the road to burnout or they're recovering from that.
So let's talk a little bit about burnout, road to burnout. And you had this holistic practice, which seems to be one of those things that one would think, well, you can't have burnout around something like that. It's holistic, it's natural, it's integrative. Did you burn out on something like that? And what does burnout mean, and how does that look?
Well, I think there's different layers of burnout. Usually when I talk about it in the spiritual sort of emotional and physical level. You could be burnt out spiritually, which tends to lead out into rather emotional burnout, which then leads into actual physical burnout. And, you know, we use burnout as a phrase. It's really something that was used to reference machines, actually. And it's kind of sad because we're in a culture now that we refer to ourselves as machines. So machines burn out, but humans burn out too. And, you know, it really doesn't matter what you're doing as a career choice, whether it's holistic or otherwise. Anyone can be susceptible to burnout. And burnout usually comes from overworking, not enough self-care, and neglect of self. And usually it comes from a driver. And a lot of women that I work with have a really toxic driver. They're coming from needing significance or certainty as their primary drivers. You know, they have a yearning for love and connection, but they tend to have that be secondary, unfortunately. And they're driving themselves to success often because they're trying to prove something to themselves or to someone else. And that's the essence of lovesick. That's where we are working from a void mentality. So anyone is susceptible to burnout. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And the fact that I was a caregiver actually made me and other caregivers way more susceptible to burnout, because as a caregiver, there's a lot of output on caring for other people. And when I sort of hit the wall, I realized after it had a name, and it was called compassion fatigue. And this happens a lot with caregivers. the suicide rates and the illness rates amongst ER doctors and primary healthcare physicians getting illnesses, chronic illnesses and otherwise is quite high. It's quite staggering. So I know it sounds like I had a holistic wellness practice and I was an alternative medicine doctor for 8 years, but it really is a lot of responsibility when you're taking on other people's health and health challenges, and you're, having to stay up to date on the latest everything and blood work and, all kinds of things, prescribing and patient care. It does get to be quite a bit if you are definitely coming from this void place, and definitely if you're coming from a place of self-neglect, which I definitely was.
Mm-hmm. I am so thrilled with the way that you answered that question. And here's the reason why. Mostly women will listen to my podcast, and mostly women have this way of talking to themselves that if I'm taking care of another person, it should be fulfilling for me. I'm just a mom. I'm just a daughter. I'm just taking care of my aging parents. I'm just. And I think it's hard for many of us to get out of the mindset that, yes, there is a thing called compassion fatigue. Yes, we might be doing something that we do love and we do enjoy, but you're right, we are overworking too. And just because we're doing something that we love doesn't mean that we can still overwork, because that's kind of part of that common misconception too with a lot of, not necessarily coaching, but a lot of career development. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, yes, but no, because you can be doing what you're loving, but also killing yourself in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of focus on fulfillment as an external job, and fulfillment is completely an internal job. And the truth of the matter is there isn't one thing or one person that is going to fill you up if you are not already full. And, we talk about the analogy, and I do a lot with my clients as well. When you're on a plane and they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your children or anyone that needs your assistance, there's a reason for that. Because if you're empty and if you're starving and if you're depleted and if you are not caring for yourself as your primary relationship, then you won't have enough to give to others and you won't be fulfilled. So fulfillment is definitely an inside job, and self-nourishing is also an inside job. And this whole movement around lovesick is really me highlighting the focus on the primary relationship with yourself. And I have a sort of a three-pronged paradigm that I teach around, which is self, source, and other. And if any one of those relationships in that relationship system is either underfed or overfed, it can cause a real imbalance. And this is where we get into things that we call burnout and just feeling unmotivated and lack of fulfillment in your relationships or in your career. And we are really taught in our culture to just keep on going, just drive past that. And it's not healthy. It's not sustainable. And we're seeing that more and more. I was just recently talking to my insurance broker around, medical and disability insurance for my business. And he was saying 40% of all claims come from people that are burnt out.
I'm sure. And I like how you talked about the void mentality, because you're right. We live in a void mentality. Get this education and you will be happy. Get this job and you will be happy. Get this relationship and you will be happy. Have another child and you will be happy. Find a better job, earn more money, get a better car. It is a void mentality, and being happy is what we create within us. It's not due to our external circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of the women that I coach, they are, they're medical doctors. One of my clients right now is a surgeon, lawyers, PhD earners. Like, you would look at these women and say, wow, like, they're very accomplished. They've done a lot. And yet inside they feel like a failure. Inside they feel like they haven't done enough. Everybody on the outside says, wow, like, look at your life. You've done all these things. You're so great. And they aren't really fulfilled on the inside. And many of them are craving that beautiful, happy relationship and overworking as a compensation or substitute for not having the intimacy in their lives that they crave. And it's really sad. And it's, unfortunately and unfortunately, a story that I know all too well because it's what I created in my life, which is why I teach around it now. And, you mentioned A Course in Miracles at the beginning. I am a student, although not always a good one, but I am a student of A Course in Miracles. And it's one of the things that really saved my life back when I was at my lowest point.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but before we move into that, I just wanted to validate, for me, for my journey, I was a corporate attorney for 10 years. Then I had that shift. That's when I realized I needed to break away.